Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar brought to you by The Space. And today, the subject we're looking at is Beyond the Hate, thinking about arts, culture, and the quality of digital conversations. I'm Linda Coburn, I'm the producer of the webinars, and I'm just going to set up how we'll work and what will happen today, and then pass you over to our panelists. So there's some very simple practical things to cover before we get any further, which is that the webinar is recorded, and we hope that we'll be able to put that onto our YouTube channel for a period of time after the event. You'll realise that you, because we're in webinar mode, cameras and microphones are off. So all the conversations that we have is through the chat function, and I'll say a little bit more about that now. So you can ask questions and make conversation using chat rather than spoken out loud, and I'll come back to that in a second. And the third very practical thing to say is that we have a live captioner with us today. That's Claire, and if you would like to use the live captions, if they'd be helpful to you, you go to the link at the bottom of the screen, and the instructions are now appearing as to that you'll need to get to the live captions. So we're talking about some quite kind of tricky issues today, and really looking at online hate and harms and all that entails. So in order to make sure that this conversation is as inclusive and positive as possible, we've set up some terms and agreement, and I'm going to put a slide up in a second, and we'll just ask you to have a read of these, a consider of these, and we are then make the judgment that if you have read and agreed to them and are still on the call, it's because you're willing to abide by these as a set of principles. So what we're saying is that comments and questions are to be respectful and positive. And again, as I said, you know, it's part of the discussion happens in the chat, and we don't want to hear or see speculation, criticism, or any kind of inflammatory language. And I think, you know, the wording of this sounds stern, but what we want to do is say, make sure that this is a space where everybody feels that they can speak confidently and comfortably. We ask that you don't assume or ask individuals to speak on behalf of any perceived social group. So they're here as representatives of themselves only. And for your questions and your comments, to put them to everyone so that all the other webinar participants can see them, as well as being directed to the panel or the hosts. So, and we're asking everybody to say hello in chat just as we start. And in exchange for that, some of the things that we've set up to make sure that this webinar works really well is that we'll record, as in I will make note of all the questions and comments that are asked as the panel are talking, so that we have a clear way of putting them to the panel in between. So it might be, rather than stopping for a question in the middle, we come back to it at the end of a section. And at the end of the session, Sarah McCaffrey, who you can see, she'll just give a wave, Sarah, and say hello. So Sarah McCaffrey is a psychotherapist, and she runs an organisation called Solace Mind. And really what she does is offer mental health and well-being support to the creative industry. So for the last part of this session, between about 12 and 1, Sarah will be available, so that if you have if anything has affected you, you know, it might be about previous experiences or anything that you've heard, there's an open group opportunity, which will be, you'll have cameras on and microphones on to kind of download and discuss some of those issues. So that's the space that we've made available for that. Sarah, have I described that in a way that you would like, or is there anything?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Thanks, Linda. Yeah, it would just be a space at the end, half an hour. If anything's bothered anyone, we can just chat in an open group. Same kind of rules apply, but it'd be a confidential space, so it won't be recorded, just to talk about if anything's triggered you or anything is concerning you. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. And then just as a last note, if any of the comments or behaviours break the agreement that we've all agreed to, then we'll identify that as a concern and ask for it to stop, and then we have a plan in place to take steps if required. And we're not assuming any of this, but just to make sure that the space feels safe. I hope that all sounds fair to anybody? Everybody? Okay. Thank you. So to the schedule, so you have a flavour of what's happening. Sarah I just introduced, and then shortly you'll hear from Fiona Morris, our Chief Executive, to kind of give you a sense of why the space thinks this is an important issue and that we should need to be talking about it. And then we'll hand over to Amanda Parker, who's hosting and moderating the session, and her panelists, who are Andrew Ogan and Sean Egan. And you'll Amanda will introduce you to them, and then the discussion carries on with a little short break in the middle. And as Sarah said, then we have some space at the end for some of those questions, and we'll be popping kind of links and useful information into the chat as we go along. Okay, so that's quite a bit of setup. I really hope you find this session useful, informative and practical. And there'll be an evaluation at the end where you can give us some feedback. So thank you, everybody. I'm just going to hand over firstly to Fiona for a brief intro and kind of a context from the space, and then she'll pass to Amanda and away we'll go.
Thank you, Linda. And hello, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. So I'm Fiona Morris. I'm the creative director and CEO of The Space. And I am a middle-aged white woman with short fair hair, and I'm wearing a black polo neck. So I just really wanted, so a bit of context. Some of you may know us from commissioning rounds and mentoring, but we support creative artists and arts organisations to think strategically and innovatively about how they can use digital tools and platforms to reach the widest diversity of audiences across, and within live practice, but obviously significantly within online practice. But we can't ignore the fact that the opportunities that presents to extend and diversify audience reach by publishing work online also often means putting work and ideas out into a much more exposed, volatile and challenged space than when we present work in a real life context. And what we've seen happening, and you'll all have witnessed this far too often, is that artists and their work and their opinions can become lightning rods for aggressive and abusive opinions online. And so we've been concerned for a while to do as much as we can to provide advice and support to organisations and individuals who experience this. We can't change the way the online world functions across social media, but there are some practical things that we can suggest by way of anticipation. And I think Angela is going to share a link to our online harms toolkit that we produced just before the pandemic. But that really started a kind of conversation internally at the Space around, could we go further and start a conversation about how we as a sector could come together to give positive support and advocacy to highlight the importance of the freedom of artists to present their work and their opinions online without being threatened or cancelled, in that kind of slightly overused word, but and maybe to try and encourage a more affirmative culture of tolerance and debate online. So we approached Amanda to talk to her about the work, as she's already undertaken lots of really groundbreaking work around some really difficult areas. And we hope that this conversation will be the first of several that she'll be working with us to produce around the subject. So I'm going to hand over to her, but by way of brief introduction, for those of you who haven't come across Amanda before, I'm sure many of you will have done. She's an arts policy consultant, a strategist, and an inclusive change maker for the cultural and creative industries. She's had wide-ranging acknowledgements for her work, including a CRE Race in the Media and a Mind Mental Health in the Media Award. And her clients and partners range from theatre and museums to festivals and to broadcasters. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Amanda. Thank you. Amanda, you're muted.
Like I've never done Zoom before. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you, Fiona, and welcome to everybody to what I hope very much will stay an inclusive and welcoming space, inclusive and welcoming of everyone, irrespective of our perspectives, experiences and differences. I do want to start with my favourite joke of all time, which is, if there's one thing I can't stand, it's intolerance. just leaving it there. I would like to, I won't outline what will happen in the next hour because we've just done that. I'm just going to dive into the weeds, really. It is everywhere, is it not? Harriet Dart, I did a Google search of the last 24 hours of what comes up around culture and online abuse. And Harriet Dart, tennis player facing abuse, Son Heung-min, footballer facing abuse, their Formula One meeting to talk about how to deal with abuse in their sport. There is an awful lot of it about. We can drill down into that further. A recent EU report from the EU's Human Rights Agency confirmed that some 80% of people surveyed have experienced or encountered some form of online hate. 80%, so most of us have experienced it, either as a witness or a recipient of online harm. 40% of those respondents have also said that they were actually harmed and left frightened or threatened by the postings that they'd seen. So this is not just a casual moving on, seeing a message we don't like and getting on with it. It's leaving a trace. So the material effect of online harm, as we know, is about dissuading genuine commentary and engagement, but it goes so much more deeper when it comes to creative lives. It can have an effect on creative processes, from the cancellation of productions to artists living in fear, and the online abuse in the arts raises important questions about freedom, creative freedom, freedom of expression, protection of freelance workers, public narratives about the so-called culture wars, and so much more. So to help us navigate this terrain, I'm joined by Sean Egan, who is a lawyer and consultant who provides business affairs to theatres and creative and cultural organisations. I always feel I should let you introduce yourself at that point. It does stop me talking. So Sean, how would you like to introduce yourself? And then you can hand over to Andrew.
Good morning, everyone. I try and help people. And in this context, there are difficult situations. And it's about trying to find the right way to balance different opinions when feelings are running high. And I do my best within a legal context to try and help people find their way through what can be very challenging situations.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a starting point. Andrew, please introduce yourself and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Organ and I'm the agent for change at the Arts Council of Wales. And yeah, in terms of when my announcement of my role about 2 years ago was announced, there was a situation, kind of, a spat of online abuse. So I'll be speaking from that perspective in today's conversation.
Thank you. And we will touch on that because actually that's exactly how our paths crossed originally, through hate. So look at that. Love can come from hate. I won't be flippant all the way through, but it's a serious point that I'm making, that actually we'll talk about allyship, and that's where we made connections. So there are lots of tools, we will get to them, but what's coming down our way very soon, like a juggernaut, is the UK Online Safety Bill, which I'm sure most in the room will have some awareness of, which changes the responsibilities for user safety for the platforms that we engage with. Going through legislation right now, becoming law in a couple of months. It's had a few changes along the way. I'm sure there are more to come. All legislation is in some way an iteration to some degree. So we're looking at how conversations are moderated as is government. And there are lots of issues around the bill as it stands. What's very clear in the bill is its focus on minimizing harm for young people. So child sexual abuse and child protection is front and center of that bill, which is completely understandable. It's less clear when it comes to adults. The adult safety duties, what you might have heard of as the legal but harmful area of the bill, has been watered down somewhat and replaced with new conditions around what's made transparent, how we deal with accountability and freedom of expression. It's safe to say that no one's satisfied with the bill as it stands. I mean, I've never seen a piece of legislation where everyone's satisfied anyway, so who's surprised? But campaigners say that it's flawed because it doesn't explicitly mention the groups in our society who are most harmed online, namely women and Black people. The bill doesn't explicitly mention women and girls, and there is a lot of advocacy going on around that, because women are 27 times more likely to face online abuse, which is just mind-boggling statistic. It gets worse. 1 in 5 women experience online abuse. Black women are 84% more likely to experience abuse online. I'm not sure if you'll recall the conversations around online abuse in Parliament, where they analysed who was getting abuse. I think the statistic for parliamentarians is something like they get a tweet with a swear word in it once every 7 seconds. That's the tip of the iceberg. But when it came to the Black parliamentarians, it was off the scale, completely off the scale. So online abuse against women and non-binary people went up by 46% during the pandemic, and it was even higher for Black women and non-binary people. Digital platforms were unhappy with the bill. With end-to-end encryption, it means that from a organizational perspective, the thing that they come to market with, our ability to make safe, secure conversations that can't be interrogated or breached, may be weakened in the bill itself. So Wikipedia is saying the additional security requirements means that their offer isn't as great as it could be, potentially. Services like WhatsApp and Signal that rely on end-to-end encryption is saying that the legislation doesn't give them proper confidence that the app won't be weakened in use. So there's a lot going on around the online safety bill. There are some things that are really clear, there are some things that aren't, but is that our only tool? That's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to start from there. That's a bit of context setting. And I want to ask both Sean and Andrew, when you think about online harm in its various forms, what kind of interactions online are you seeing causing the most harm in creative spaces? And what does this mean for cultural engagement? I'll start with Andrew, as you nodded.
I think for me, just generally speaking, the issue seems to be that the online space tends to adopt a punitive approach rather than a empathetic one. It feels that people are very quick and ready to punish and to just jump and kind of hound someone, you know, depending on the topic. And there's no nuance, you know, the online space, you know, Twitter, you have a few words to get your point across. You know, it's not like a real life conversation in which there are other social cues and body language and far more of an ability to actually converse properly. But, you know, in 140 characters, whatever it is, all nuance is kind of seemingly eradicated. And so you're getting these polarized conversation in which people are just kind of shouting over each other without actually paying any attention to what's being said. So interactions tend to take this kind of approach, which of course does not foster a healthy or conducive environment in any way, shape or form to actually have any kind of dialogue about anything.
And why do you think do you think it's more prevalent in creative and cultural practices? What does that look like for you?
I think in a way in creative and cultural practices, it's already a very much kind of open, forward facing public thing to be in, you know, and I think anything that has that kind of level of being out in the public and promoting your work or promoting yourself, which these sectors tend to do, lends itself more to this because your profile or your public perception is of a higher standing than the average person. You know, and you get it a lot as well with athletes, for example. Anybody in this kind of realm in which you are deemed to be a person of any kind of renown,
Where
I
you
think
can be seen.
exactly is that sense of visibility. We're far more visible. And I think what social media also does is also create this false sense of access and accessibility, where people feel like they know somebody because of this visibility, but you don't know anybody. You know, social media is, as we all know, a construct. People are putting forward whatever they decide to put forward. So this kind of false sense of familiarity and accessibility means people can, you know, think they can talk to anyone anyhow. And kind of as a consequence of that, there's also not that much consequence to it, because, you know, a lot of these accounts still stay up and running forever. Social media platforms have, you know, struggled to eradicate hate from their platforms. No matter what they try and do, you ban a person, they just create a new account. It's, you know, faceless accounts. So it's very difficult to actually eradicate this totally. And then, you know, you create this environment in which this tends to happen then.
So from what you've just said, the people feel they can talk to anybody anyhow. It's made me feel like maybe we should approach online engagement as though you're talking to your nana. Just a thought. Sean, same question to you. What kinds of online interaction are you seeing in the creative and cultural sector that are causing the most harm? Is there a specific type?
I think that it's really hard, because in a lot of the instances I've been involved with, wearing different hats, the really alarming thread is the fact that the people complaining about work haven't seen it, and that they are receiving information about what the work is about and vociferously objecting to it, and you get this juggernaut that is created incredibly quickly, and it may have been instigated by people with particular interests, quite extreme interests, who are not actually interested in the work itself, but they're interested in a particular view of society, and they're not interested in, as Andrew's outlining, a debate or engaging. It's a fire that's out of control very quickly. Sorry.
There are some really interesting statistics around the free speech versus censorship issue, and they are absolutely equally balanced for the number of people who feel that doing anything different will lead to censorship and state control is equally matched by the people who feel that leaving it like that threatens normal civic engagement. It's quite incredible. In your experience, to both of you, do you think culture is particularly a vulnerable place, or are we just symptomatic of society? What does this mean for culture?
If I may, I don't think it's particularly vulnerable. I think we're all aware of it because that's where we live, in our cultural space, if you like. I think it happens everywhere. And I think the interesting thing for me within dealing all the time with cultural organizations who are aware of other cultural organizations and what they do and how they behave, it's that internal community that to some extent is regulating how people respond, not always in a good way, but there is that self-regarding element of it, which I think is not present in other areas of society, and the online hate that is going around that hasn't got a focus.
So there's something about the nature of our work, which is where self-reflection is hardwired into it. But I'd say possibly, Andrew, you may have an opinion, public purse. We are in a sector which is at least driven by public funding, as much as commercial and profit bearing imperative. So there's something else, isn't there? There's something else that is quite complicated about how we engage and what we can do when we are recipients of public funding.
I think I agree with Sean in the sense that I don't necessarily think it's unique to the cultural or creative sphere. As I said, I use the example of athletes. You know, I think those are some of the people who get a lot of hate and under a lot of scrutiny and pressure at all times to be, you know, put their best foot forward. So I don't think it's unique to culture. But you're right, we do operate in that sphere of, you know, public funding as well. So does that mean that, you know, we owe the public something a bit more? I don't know. You know, are we more responsible in that sense? But again, I think Sean hit the nail on the head. Most of the time, the people in this sphere are not interested really sincerely in anything except for stoking, you know, the conversation in a way that's not positive.
And that's useful to think of it in terms of culture provides a hook for people who have time and energy to get enthusiastic, negatively enthusiastic about it. I want to ask you, you referred to it earlier, Andrew, and how we first connected, how I first knew of you, I should put it that way, was through the online farm that cohered around your appointment with Arts Council Wales. But you also talked to me about a phenomenal difference in experience that you saw before you joined Arts Council Wales. Can we start with what happened to you? Tell us a little bit about your story and how that was handled.
Yeah, so in terms of speaking about my appointment, yes, Arts Council released a tweet kind of about my appointment to the role, and it was flooded with comments, both sides, both negative and positive, but there was a kind of, a series of negative responses to it, questioning why I should be the person representing the Welsh Arts Council, questioning what makes me kind of Welsh in the first place, or my Welshness in that sense, and this kind of association with whiteness and Welshness, you know, things about my personal image, or all that kind of stuff. But for me, it was obviously just an extraordinary experience to also see then on the flip side how much, as a, you know, I think, Amanda, when we spoke personally, as I said, how much the positive drowned the negative in that sense. And again, in terms of me personally, online harm is not something that would ever have a severe impact on me just because of how I am as a person. But again, for me, it was really interesting to see where that was coming from. I wanted to understand the root of people's alarm at my role. And, you know, for me, there was a comment in terms of, you know, this is how it starts. And in a few years' time, is everybody going to be looking like this in these roles? So there was that real fear of white annihilation in a lot of the comments. And for me, that was the interesting part, is people perceiving, you know, my appointment as being this, you know, the start of some sort of Armageddon in which all white people are then kind of wiped out. So yeah, for me, it was interesting to get an insight into the psyche of where, you know, where are these people at mentally? What exactly about it is it that's eliciting such a negative, visceral response?
So I recall one message that was literally in block capitals going, look at him, and for the life of me, I was looking at you and thinking, what can I not see? And it was simply blackness that I couldn't see because I hadn't seen, but people were really coming for you. Look at him, crazy. I want to understand what happened in these terms. So the appointment was made. Did it appear on your social media? Did you suddenly get an influx? Was your phone pinging a lot? What was the process by which all of those alerts came to you, and what happened next in terms of Arts Council?
So it was on the Arts Council page. It was, and I quote tweeted it. I think it's my pinned tweet. So if anyone goes on my Twitter now, you'll see is that my pinned tweet. Probably if you scroll, you could probably see some of the comments. So yeah, Arts Council were the people that tweeted it. I quote tweeted it, like, you know, looking forward to getting started and getting on with the work. And then my phone just started going crazy. And again, it was initially, it was more, the negative comments came quite a while after. So initially it was just, my phone was going crazy, just people in general being like, oh, well done, congratulations, etc., etc. But again, I have all my notifications and stuff turned off. So I was kind of like, okay, my phone's going crazy, let me leave it down. And then I remember I got a phone call actually from, someone I consider my mentor. And she was just like, oh, like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, like, why would I not be, I was very confused. I was like, why would I not be okay? She was like, oh, like all the stuff on Twitter, like, are you seeing some of the stuff on Twitter? I was like, no, I've only seen like all the congrats and stuff. She was like, oh no, there's some kind of negative comments as well. So she sent me a few, and I was just some of them were quite humorous. So I was like, oh, this is just really funny. So I was looking through, but then again, I was getting more flooded with comments of people coming to my support and coming to my backing and really dismantling all the critique.
So that's really important, that there were two things there, that you had managed your own notifications and what you were seeing, and also you experienced from the outset an allyship. People reached out to you to make sure you were okay. And you've talked about how Arts Council Wales have built a support group for you to use if and when. Yeah,
so Arts Council were obviously very concerned. They did know, they were firstly obviously wanted to make sure I was okay. So I got a call from senior leadership, and my line manager to be like, look, are you okay? They didn't expect the reception generally. Even they were like, we've never had this kind of reception to anything we've put out, whether positive or negative. So they were like, this is all a totally new experience for us, because we have never had this level of engagement on anything on social media ever before. So that was a new experience for them. And then they were like, secondly, are you okay again? And I was like, yeah, I'm all good. And they were like, what can we do? So, it was instantly like, what can we do? How can we make this better? What do you need in place? And again, I didn't really have an answer, because I was like, I'm genuinely fine.
But your personal experience contrasts hugely with the experience you saw before you came into Arts Council Wales. If you can tell us briefly about that one without going into the weeds of the harm caused, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so that was while I was in post, so not beforehand. That situation was subsequent. But again, I came from activism. I was the one that did the Black Lives Matter protests in my area here in Wales, Newport and the surrounding areas, Gwent. So again, I was very used and comfortable to being in this kind of polarized space, because the dialogue around that was even more difficult than around my appointment. You generally had people, this was in the peak of the pandemic, we had biker gangs and people in the community who were very resistant to us protesting, very resistant to all the work, etc. So again, there was this, and there was a lot of stuff online in general about me, who I was, people inquiring about who I was, where I'd come from, why I was doing everything, trying to dig a little deeper into my history. And this was online and in person. So again, I was quite used to navigating this kind of atmosphere. But yeah, following on from that, Arts Council kind of was like, look, should we have a support group for you in case anything like this happens, etc., etc. So that was kind of the solution that worked well for me. But again, as the manager just alluded to, I had a very different experience to someone that we worked with within Arts Council. So we commissioned a report. We commissioned 3 reports, but one of those reports was looking at the experiences of ethnically and culturally diverse people in the arts. And when that report was published, it accused the Arts Council of being institutionally racist. And that caused headlines. And secondly, there was also a statement within that report that said that current Welsh language policies are excluding ethnically and culturally diverse people. And that particular statement was the thing that right-wing press and right-wing commentators really picked up on, because again, the Welsh language community is very passionate here.
It's a very emotional space.
It's a very emotional space, very emotive, yes, very, very difficult space sometimes to navigate. And they really took issue with that comment and really couldn't see where it was coming from. And they really took it out of context, because if you actually read the report and see the context, it was based off the real experience that people had of feeling like not being able to speak the Welsh language was preventing them from getting certain opportunities, which is a fact, because certain roles within the cultural sphere in Wales
Absolutely
was language
required.
essential? So,
Yes.
which again, you know, removes a lot of people from the pool. So that's where that comment was coming from, but it got completely spun out of context, and a right-wing commentator picked it up and was trying to find out who it was that wrote the report, because they wrote the report as an organization, Welsh Arts Anti-Racist Union, but they didn't say who the members were. And us as an Arts Council, we knew a few of them, but we didn't know all the members. So we obviously protected their right to anonymity, but we were getting pressured from all sorts of directions to reveal who was in the group. Of course, we didn't. And this right-wing commentator kept digging and digging and digging and digging, and had an informant of some sorts, and ended up finding out who one of the members were and doxed that member. That member started receiving death threats. They said they knew where she lived, etc., etc., etc. And they came to us, obviously in distress, saying, we didn't anticipate any of this. You didn't prepare us for any of this. All of this was true, but a lot of this was done before I'd taken up the role. So I took up the role right just before it got published. So I wasn't in the initial conversations where, you know, could have stepped in to say, look, let's outline, you know, what this work could actually bring. And yeah, it ended up being a very harrowing situation for the group involved and the individual that got doxed. You know, we eventually managed to get somewhere, and the commentators stopped and everything died down. But you know, that period of time was very tense, and you know, we didn't know kind of how serious these threats were. So it really got dangerous, and police were involved, and we were involved, etc., etc. So
That sounds like the absolute worst case scenario for
yeah,
organisations, and I'd like to bring in Sean now. As a trustee and as a consultant to the sector, you've seen an awful lot of very, very different experiences and challenges that organisations have faced around managing abuse, both in digital and physical spaces. I want to ask, what's the potential impact of instances like this that Andrew's talked about on arts and cultural engagement specifically? This kind of behaviour, what does it lead to in terms of our cultural engagement?
I mean, first of all, I'd say that if you've been subjected to that sort of extreme behaviour, Andrew, you know, the fact that you are still standing and functioning, I take my hat off to you. You know, that's the damage it can cause people. You know, no one should underestimate. I think that it's shocking to me that people threaten violence, people do subject people to threats which necessarily are taken seriously, and that level of fear is very problematic for cultural organizations about protecting people, as well as working how to present work. And
does it change how we present work?
Yes, I think so. I think people are becoming defensive, and I would always want artists to be able to challenge and provoke, albeit it within, you know, a justified and responsible manner. And I think that there's the notion of self-censorship and anxiety within organizations is considerable. And I think that what it does do is anyone within, I'm just talking from an organization's point of view, not the individual, an organization that's been through it's a huge amount of management time. And I know that doesn't compare with Andrew's experience, but just in terms of running an organization that may be publicly funded or otherwise, it completely derails the functioning of the organization for a period of time. And the very substantial reputational issues are a big concern to trustees and people, you know, with governance responsibilities.
So it undermines organisations' confidence and sucks up their resource. What does it do for the public, and what does it do for individual artists?
I think in the long term, my concern is that the public may feel there's less challenging work, which they may not be particularly aware of, but it may be less innovative work. I think for individual artists, I am really concerned that their working life is more stressful as a result of the anxiety about what if might happen, because when these social media storms hit, as Andrew's described, they are very destabilizing, and that should not be part of anyone's working life.
Yeah. And there are, for every artist, I'm thinking the game developer Zoe Quinn and the abuse that she faced online, which she kind of amplified to use to her advantage in launching a game. Photographers like Lindsay Bolton. There are individual artists, I can think of Ballet Black, who take the abuse and turn it into something very powerful about their work. But that should not be, should it, a requirement of every artist, and nor is it feasible or possible or even desirable for people to feel they have to engage like that. There are lots of questions coming in the chat, so I feel I should chuck some to you. Do you like some questions? Do you like some? So, if you could add in at this point, if social media can be a poor place for growth or change, what are the good spaces for this? I will give space to that for a while, a bit more further down the line, but I think this question is about best practice. So social media feels like a potential place for growth and change. Where are the good spaces for that kind of dialogue, for a healthier dialogue?
I think it's difficult on social media. For me, nothing beats real life, nothing beats curated spaces, very, spaces like this, very specific, where the intention is laid out. Everybody understands the purpose of the space. Everybody comes, with that kind of kindness in their heart, which you don't always get in social media. I think you've got really specific forums. I see on Facebook, for example, when I was doing BLM work, there was a lot of different forums that came as a result of that, where people kind of created, groups on Facebook, closed groups, specific spaces. So there's definitely avenues on social media to have really kind of genuine, purposeful conversation. But I think it has to be very, very intentional in its approach. It's hard to just kind of get those kind of conversations off the rip without building that intention within the space beforehand. I don't think ad hoc conversation on social media, there's no guarantee that it's going to remain kind of
and I think that's the interesting thing, that I know that the legislation is still a little bit woolly about it, but in my mind, social media is still broadcast, which is a very different thing from a conversation. So broadcast is a one-way street. Even if we open the floor to questions from the floor, as we are, it's still a one-way street. I want to save the other questions because they come to the second half, and we're moving very quickly to the break around what can we do, what are the tools that we have. But I do want to ask, just coming back to you, Sean, you've talked about the impact on artists, public confidence, potentially safer work, artists living in restricted circumstances, organisations having their energy, capability and reputation really trawled. Are there any implications for grant-giving bodies or funding routes?
There are absolutely concerns about grant-giving bodies. And generally, grant givers are very good at ignoring the smoke from these sorts of storms. Sorry, metaphors mixing, apologies. But there is always an anxiety. And I have seen one case where an artist was subject to one of these, and a national funding body looked at one of her other projects and raised questions about, was it appropriate to proceed with it, etc. So I think it feeds into my concern about anxiety and fear, because to prove that an organization is a funding organization is robust and strong, you're having to prove a negative. And I think it's more that the anxiety is that it's something that it may affect their decision making. And given that project funding and grant giving is so much more difficult now than it was a few years ago for the applicant, and there's much more competition, again, you don't want to be playing to those anxieties.
Yeah. So we're going to go for a quick break, 5-minute break. On the other side of the conversation, we will talk about what can we do. We want to get active in our response and in our conversation. So in 5 minutes, we'll come back to that. At the end of our conversation, we will invite you to join Sarah in our decompression space for anyone who's been affected by any of the elements of this conversation so far. So we're turning cameras off for 5 minutes, and I will see you just shortly after 10:02. Thank you. We as a cultural and creative sector can do about it. I am joined by Sean Egan, a consultant and lawyer, and Andrew Ogan, an activist and change maker. Thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to pick up on, in the first half, we talked about the impact and the implications of the abuse we see online. We briefly touched on the online harms bill coming our way, and the fact that there is some real vagueness around the harm caused that's not illegal, because the bill is very clear on what's legal, but the harm that's not illegal, but extremely damaging, because I think that's where most of the interactions sit within the creative and cultural sector. So Sean, can you tell us a bit more about what's in our disposal, what's at our disposal right now, and what difference the bill will make?
Thank you, Amanda. I mean, first of all, it's a huge bill. It's 200 sections. It's lots of schedules, and it's also tactically, it requires platforms to introduce their own policies and rules, and Ofcom to regulate the whole sphere. So we're going to have to wait until we see how the service providers and Ofcom approach what's in the bill before we really know. But the legal but harmful area, which was in the original bill, which is about toxic behavior, which is really, as you say, what we've been talking about, has also, as you say, has been watered down. And it feels like this bill, and it's not dissimilar from the European Digital Safety Act, Digital Services Act, which is in force actually, so they're ahead. The focus is on eliminating the illegal content rather than getting people to behave better online. I assume it's partly because it's the illegal activities that everyone can agree should be eliminated that are the motive of the legislation. So I'm not really sure that that much will change. It may affect, we then have to identify what is illegal. And the relevant areas are things like hate crime, but hate crime is limited to particular characteristics being the motive for attack.
And again, comes back to the crime, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all it does is it picks up the online nature of the crime, but it doesn't create a new crime.
Yeah.
And that's very much what happens, what's in the European legislation too. So I think that a lot of what we've talked about already is going to continue, and it's going to be modes of behavior that are going to enable people to work through this. Because certainly in my experience and with my great age, I think of things moving very quickly. A huge amount has happened in the last few years, and behaviors are changing all the time. And maybe we're getting better at dealing with these sorts of issues as an artistic cultural community.
And at the same time, no government ever, understandably, wants to legislate on behaviour. It's because we will talk about it later in this conversation, that one man's freedom of expression is another man's censorship and vice versa. So it's understandable. I'm really excited by you saying we've got better at dealing with this as a sector. I think that's really exciting. Tell me what we can do then. I'm really mindful that we have lots of communication specialists in the room listening to this conversation. What are the steps that feel like the right things, the appropriate things, and the feasible things that we can do right now to manage the legal but harmful elements of online?
From my trustee, wearing my trustee hat, I would say that these storms happen very quickly, and there's often a desire to react quickly. And I think that often they've passed very swiftly, come and go in the same sort of way. I think it's worth taking time to understand what the issue is all about before putting anything out, because you can end up following the story rather than putting your definitive side of it. And I think that you can't control what happens, but you can try and anticipate in a sophisticated way how you're going to, from an organization's point, diffuse the potential harm to the organization.
So we always have been told since the internet began, do not feed the trolls, has been a very straightforward piece of advice, but of course it's got more nuance now. I think it's important for us to talk about the need to document what we've seen if we are going to be reporting and asking, as the bill requires us to do, to report inappropriate behaviour. We need to have that evidence, do we not?
Absolutely. And from my lawyer's point of view, the real anxiety is you're tried in a court of public opinion, guilty until proven innocent, and it's very difficult, and obviously in some circumstances there may be behaviours that you absolutely need to call out. But the organization, these are very complicated three-dimensional stories, and they can evolve into something quite different quite quickly. And I really think that it's, from an organization's point of view, worth understanding where it's going is as important as trying to put your side of the story out there.
And what does that look like, the understanding where it's going? I mean, none of us can have the forward vision goggles. How can we tell?
Well, it's talking to everyone to make sure you understand exactly what happened and who said what, who did what,
okay,
in what context, because we've got, different people have different views of behaviors, and you have to understand all the relevant points of view.
Yeah. So this does take us into the tricky terrain of culture wars, and whether we are acting as arbiters on liberal perspectives or alternative perspectives for engagement. I want to just go through a kind of step-by-step to point out the Spaces Online Abuse Toolkit, which is really useful with taking us through those steps on what we can do. I've mentioned documenting, assessing one's safety, which is what you're saying, work out what else is going on in this dialogue, who said what, what's happening. We know that we can block, mute, and report. We can touch on allyship. We will come back to you, Andrew, on allyship. And there's the self-care piece as well that we will talk to, and indeed Sarah will hopefully support. I want to go to some of the questions we received earlier around what we can do. And there's a question around, what do you consider best practice procedure for dealing with a public complaint or commentator that's taken offence to a post? That's quite a specific one. What's best practice for dealing with a public complaint or a commentator who's taken offence?
Is this one for me?
I think it is.
I mean, it's a really broad question, in the sense that there are so many different sorts of complaints. But I think, first of all, first of all, I want to assess how many of these sorts of complaints the organisation receives generally, because it's about resources. But if there are relatively few, it's about making the complainant feel as though they're being taken seriously. And then taking the time to gather all the relevant facts before, in a definitive way, responding.
And I'm sure all of the comms professionals here will be saying, and take it offline as soon as you possibly can, that conversation, which is very true. I interrupted you, so that's
no, I've no more to say. I think it's a very precarious space, and I think that there is an assessment as to how much, whether this is something that was a spur of the moment thing, or whether this is something that's going to resurface. Again, it's about assessing the available resources.
And Andrew, this feels like a good time to bring you in, because the next question I'd like to consider through the lens of Arts Council Wales and your comments about language and access around Welsh language. This question wasn't about Welshness in particular, but I think your views are really helpful here in that perspective. How do we deal with abuse or harassment that is culture specific when working with traditional art forms from specific communities? So I'm going to unpack that a little bit. An art form that is culturally specific, that faces abuse or harassment, what do we do about that? We're talking about a minoritized practice facing challenge?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. For me, the online question is difficult because in my own head is trying to find a balance between kind of what do I do as an individual and then what do we do. In terms of, Arts Council, I'm not aware of any instance of very, abuse in terms of a very specific art form. I was trying to think of, would there be any examples of that? But again, for me, it just goes back to, support. I think as an organization, we would do what we can do with that cultural sensitivity in mind. Trying to think of an example, maybe, maybe a music genre that's minoritized or a form of dance that's minoritized. I think it would be a case of really trying to provide support to that individual from the outset. And again, not assuming what kind of support any individual needs, but actually taking that approach of being the facilitators, as an Arts Council, although we're a funding body, we also operate as a facilitator. We're also someone that people look to in that kind of capacity. So I think in that instance, it would be a case of, identifying the needs of the individual, if it's an individual organization, and supporting in any way we can, really. In the same instance, and I know it's quite vague, it's quite a general answer, but I don't know what the specific approach would be to the specific art form, I think.
But actually, it's about what you've suggested is being responsive to the specificity, basically. Seeking more knowledge, as you've talked about, Sean, around the context of the abuse, but matching that with understanding what those bespoke needs are for those individuals harmed. Let me, to both of you, widen it out a little bit then to go, what best practice have you seen? And I want to go, there's lots of ways we can look at this. In the UK, as opposed to not, in creative practices or other sectors, there's lots of ways you might reflect on that, but I'd love to hear about instances of best practice and what we can share collectively in this space about that. I will invite Sean to go first.
I hesitate only because I don't know about the contrasting international best practice, but I think that resolving, when you're talking about individuals perhaps who've worked on a production who have not got on for whatever reason, and trying to resolve disputes, that's a very skilled process, but it's also very important for the organization. And I appreciate I'm talking always from an organization's point of view, but to provide those individuals with a space they can trust is really delicate and important. And I think it's also something that people need to think very hard about, because it's very easy for views to be polarized as so-and-so is impossible, or so-and-so, oh no, they'll never see this. And ironically, it's actually little things and understanding and respect that actually can really help resolve issues. Because in the end, the people within the artistic community who have the same objective, which is making good work, generally they have more in common than more apart. I think we've talked a lot about public social media storms and so forth, where you're dealing with uncontrolled people who are not within the community. And I think that you have to distinguish between the different sorts of issues to try and find the best strategy to work your way through it. But for me, I'm learning all the time. And I think if everyone wants to learn about everyone's particular points of views and sensitivities, that's a really important means of trying to prevent or diffuse issues happening. Andrew may have different views about that, but I feel from my perspective, that's where everyone has to be pushing to change themselves,
I think compassion and understanding runs through this work from every perspective, from the perpetrators of harm to the individuals harmed by those actions. I like to think of people working from best intent. I know that's really challenging when you're faced with abuse, but actually there's also something about understanding that perspective or understanding that fear, as you've both talked to. Lots of instances we can refer to are where the public abuse is very clear that they haven't actually engaged with the work. So it's more about fear of something, isn't it, than what they've seen or participated in. Andrew, the same question to you. What best practice have you seen in the UK and elsewhere beyond your own? Because I think that felt like a great test case. And it may not be in creative sectors. What have you seen that you go, yeah, that is what we should be doing?
For me, it's important, depending on the context, that the individual feels supported, particularly say in the instance we had with the report that we commissioned that I was explaining. I think a lot of people in the press were expecting Arts Council and the museum, because it was a jointly commissioned project, to kind of back away from it because of, you know, how much they were hounding us. But actually, the statement, the museum released a really, really good statement of actually, you know, we support what was said in the report. We support these individuals regardless. And there was really a shift after that statement, because I genuinely think the expectation were, are they going to backtrack from this? You know, they're going to backtrack away from this. But actually, we doubled down and expressed our support publicly for the organization and for the individuals involved. And I think that was just a really important thing to do. So I think in instances, again, I go back to athletes, because those are the people I really see at that level. You know, you'll get the club release a statement, you know, saying they condone what's happened and how much they support the individual, which again might not be much, but I think it does something when you can show your public support in that sense. Yeah, going back to that allyship. But I think for me, the conversation is difficult, because obviously, you know, it's unfortunately a lot of it is to do with not the strength, but just how a person is built in that sense. You know, because online abuse is one of those things that's really, really difficult, and you can really see the impact it has on people, and how certain individuals navigate it really drastically differ. For me, I kind of didn't engage, but you get people who engage and it makes it worse, and there's all these sorts of different approaches, but you know, you can't help it. You know, it's an emotive situation to be in, and you might respond from a place of emotion, or a place of hurt, or a place of pain, trauma, all of these things, which might not always be the best thing, but
yeah,
you know.
So the Spaces digital toolkit is in the chat, has lots more detail on it, but I think it is worth me doing a very kind of whistle-stop tour of kind of what is put out as helpful approaches to online abuse. We've talked about documenting it. We know that people can delete tweets once they've put their harm out there. It's really important to document it if you feel that you're going to take the next step, which is the reporting it. That is a requirement. Where we are with the online safety bill is a requirement of reporting, so you will need the evidence to report, just as you would in the real world. You'd keep a record. And there are some fantastic tools online. I think Glitch keep a how to record online harms process. They've got a fantastic process that people can use. We've talked about assessing safety, assessing your safety. As you said, Andrew, this varies so much depending on the individual, but putting your emotional and physical well-being front and center is really important. So that might influence whether you engage online, take them offline, put a holding statement. There may be lots of different ways, but actually that's about assessing your safety and responding in a safe way. Block, mute, report. Blocking your visibility of all those messages, as you mentioned earlier, Andrew, you'd done it almost by routine, which again, this wasn't sitting on you heavily, but had it been so, you'd have been managing your own self-care already by not
Just to
see.
say, I have my notifications on generally, so I didn't turn them off specifically for the post.
Yeah.
I just turned them off anyway. So yeah,
I think I should do that as well. Actually.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
I do it because I don't like getting hundreds of millions of things coming up on my phone every day, but it also really helped in this instance.
Yeah. And allyship is a really important one. One example I can bring to the space is Ballet Black, who received a huge outpouring of abuse when they announced their season. And what we did collectively was invite the creative and cultural sector to respond positively. And this, I must say, is a really useful tool. And to the question in the chat about what we can do as organizations, I would very much invite organizations to do the same thing. If there is a lot of traffic that is negative, you can actually love bomb, overwhelm with the positive, share the good stuff, share the key message again, bring the conversation back to what the original one was. So that's a bit about dialing down the hate in a digital space by putting the positive messaging and showing your allyship and support of those organizations. For Ballet Black, that meant that hundreds of creative organizations shared their program, shared the dates of their program, shared their beautiful imagery, and it dialed down the noise of the chat, the negative chat. And a word of caution around speaking out. Sometimes it's useful. We've talked about the artist. Carisha Woods is another one who takes the experience of doxing and makes it into a rich tapestry that informs her art. There are many other organizations and individuals who take that speaking out process and turning it into a creative endeavor, which is phenomenal. But again, I say, should never be an expectation of any artist. So that one is a kind of tread with care, but speaking out can be useful. Self-care is always, always useful. So I want to ask about, to both of you, we've talked about allyship. Is it right for the onus to be on individuals reporting, or should it be something else? You know, if I'm being harmed, should it be down to me to report that, or is it somebody else's job? Is it the platform? Is it the service provider? Is it the organization? Or is it me, the individual? Genuine question.
I think the platforms need to be doing better, personally. I think the kind of threshold to have an account on things is far too low. Obviously, there's no form of identification, really, which I know comes with its own problems. It's precarious, not straightforward. It's just, not everybody has identification for various reasons, etc. But again, the ability to just be an anonymous kind of troll online is, I think, just far too easy. The ability to kind of keep spawning accounts or, keep harassing people, I think is far too easy. So I do think there needs to be more of an onus on platforms to do better to safeguard their spaces, and also to make people aware of just kind of how harrowing these things can be.
And Sean, I'm wondering whether you would share that view, thinking about the power of anonymity when you are in a repressive regime, for example. There are sometimes instances where anonymity online is a helpful thing, isn't it? How do we bridge the gap between anonymity and harm and anonymity and usefulness?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, I think for 99.9% of people, anonymity is an enabler of some of the worst behaviors. How you separate the minority who need it in order to do good things, gosh, that's huge. And my initial reaction to your question was removing anonymity would be where I would start as a means of diffusing some of the bad behaviors, because it's the one thing that that online activity is different from other human engagement. It's anonymous, and therefore it leaves no trails, and there is no desire in the bill to address that. There are some rather weak, because we're not a rights-based legal system, nods to journalistic content or privacy and so forth, but not as strong, it seems to me, as the European approach. So I think putting the onus onto the individual, that's top-down, disappointing approach that's very predictable. And, you know, that's why I don't think a great deal is going to change, because we've seen the platform's approach is hardly to embrace promoting good behaviors with the algorithms and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it is a really interesting and tricky bill, isn't it? Because it does need to balance very genuine concerns about freedom of expression, as well as protecting individuals who are harmed. I think I've got understanding of the challenge, but yes, concerns about whether this will affect it. I'd like to, if I may, invite a quick look at some slides I've put together in my online search around this. I discovered that Formula One, who knew, are ahead of the curve on this. And mindful of our conversation about not wanting to close down debate and free speech, this is an interesting approach to take. May not be for everyone. So Arwen are one of the world's leading AI companies, and we could have a conversation about AI, but that's another day. If we can go to the next slide, they created basically an AI intervention that looks at and deals with toxic postings on the Formula One president's social media account. They ran a pilot between September 2022 and January 23, and you can see from the statistics that by auto-hiding severely toxic messages, it made a huge difference to the amount of abuse that was visible on their platform. And again, if we go to the next slide, they did the same thing on FIFA's, it shouldn't say FIFA, I'm so sorry, that should be saying Formula One official media channels. And again, it's made a huge difference by auto-hiding the severely toxic messages to what is seen. And what isn't shared in this data is the fact that not only did it reduce the hate, the visible hate, but it meant that there was more room for the positive sentiment, the positive engagement. I'm struck by the figure at the bottom of this page, 0.84%. So it's only 1% of the total number of harmful messages dealt with. And that comprises 3,000 plus messages. I'm really struck by that. But what I'm struck by, thank you for the slides, is this. We are in this room, and I'm sure that the communication leads amongst us here, really challenged by the requirements for moderation and interception and intervention. And for all of the concerns around AI, of which there are many, here is AI being used in quite a practical and useful way. As I said, it's a pilot. Formula One are blessed with financial resource. It's a very interesting starting point for creatives and others who need to manage their own comms to go, is there an AI approach to minimizing this noise? I just wanted to put that in the space because I thought that was quite an interesting intervention when we look at how we deal with this. We are coming to the end of our time together, which has gone far too quickly. I want to flag again, the Spaces Online Abuse Toolkit is there. We've also included resources from Glitch, who are doing phenomenal work around how to be an active bystander online and how to have difficult discussions online, all of which are fantastic. There's a raft of other stuff that we can put in the chat as well as on this slide here for you to dive into. I want to make sure that there is room for evaluation, which we can go to now. Evaluation is always the bit where people like me get very excited because I quite like to critique what I've been through. And some people will go, oh, I'm out of here. I don't want to critique it. I want to process it. Now, if you can, stay with us, find the link in the chat, because after the session closes, we will invite you into a space with Sarah, who will hold, as a psychotherapist, a fantastic space to decompress, to just reflect, and to ensure that we have given space and time to transitioning from this conversation into the rest of your day. So please do take a few minutes to do the evaluation. It would be so wonderful to have lots. And if we can go back to screens now, that would be fantastic. I want to thank everybody for taking part. I want to thank Sean and Andrew for your wisdom and kindness and your facts and experience. Thank you so much. Thank you to the space for hosting this conversation. I feel like it's the start. As ever, it's always the start because there is so much. We went towards freedom of expression, and Sean basically went, whoa, big topic, which is absolutely right. We can't do it justice in 2 minutes. I'm going to stop now. Thank you, audience, for attending. And over to Linda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and I put appreciation to Andrew and to Sean into the chat as well. Fiona, did you want to say anything before we move on? And I'll explain how the group session will work.
Indeed, and I just wanted to thank Amanda as well for her insights, which have been fantastic, and to Sean and to Andrew. It's been a great session, and absolutely to echo what Amanda said. I think this is the beginning of a conversation that we can be having, and that we hope other organizations and individuals will want to kind of pick up and run. I think, you know, it's easy to forget to be positive in this world. And I think we underestimate the power of, if we all just raise our voices positively, that can in fact shift the balance on some of these issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much.